That's right. I'm doing another K-7 build. Most of you are familiar with the K-7, the Matchbox K-7 that you see there. This isn't the exact casting used in this build, but it's basically the same thing. Sometimes you just look at a casting and you see something. And for whatever reason, what I suddenly saw on the K-7 was a bone shaker. The Hot Wheels bone shaker that virtually everybody's familiar with. Some people love the skull on the front. Some people hate the skull on the front. Basically, otherwise, I think most people like the overall shape of the vehicle. So I was looking at the K-7, and I was doing a build of a bone shaker at the time, which that video should have been released a week ago if all the timing on these is working out properly. And if I did everything right, I even put a tease for this build into that video. But I thought I could just see the bone shaker in the cab of the K-7. So I chopped off the roof, as you see there, and started fiddling around with how I wanted to cut it to give it that roof line of the bone shaker. Now I'll tell you up front, this is a long video, and I apologize for the length of the video, and at the same time, I do a lot of different things in this build that I wanted to show. I didn't want to just jump over them. So I'll speed them up in some parts, and I won't talk completely through this video because, dear Lord, it's over 30 minutes long, the way I have it set up presently. And so there will be music in between and other things to kill time. At that point, I was still thinking I was going to try and use part of the roof of the original K-7 to give that front lip, and then I just decided, no, I like the cut. I notched it a little more. I definitely wanted to keep the swing-up doors. And so the thinking was, when I was looking at this, is, and you'll see another thing coming up here in a second, the second part of what pushed me towards this concept. I wanted to keep the swing-up doors. I wanted to move the driver's seat, the cab, the seating in the cab, back to where those doors are. Normally it sits in that open area that you see there and has the glass around the front of it. I wanted to push all of that back. I wanted to do like on the bone shaker and have the engine sticking out of the hood and give it the same engine look of the bone shaker. So after doing the cutting, I needed to do a little cleaning. And so this is the shaping and cleaning of the body. Now I wanted to keep the original cab of the K-7. I didn't want to stop using that. I didn't want to custom build an interior. I wanted to keep that interior. I just wanted to push it back. So I cut off the back section. That allowed me to pull the seats back into that door area. And it was I was stupid doing this with the jeweler saw, because I I don't know if I was going too fast, but I actually started to melt the plastic with the saw. I should have used the X-Acto saw, but no, I always think of that too late. But here I am just customizing the cab area. Now, if this build didn't seem goofy enough already, I was going to use Muscle Machine's wheels that, like off of this car here. I basically ended up pulling the back wheels off of this one and two others and using that for the wheels for the K-7. But the real goofy-ass idea was taking this apart because I wanted to use the hood. I wanted to use the front end of this car on the K-7. And if you look at the engine, you'll notice, and I'm not sure I give you a good look at it here, but you'll see later, that it looks a lot like the Bone Shaker engine. And here's where I get my goofy idea of cutting off the front of this car. And you know, I'm popping off the little plastic details and stuff. I wanted to get to the metal. And then the surround for the engine is plastic as well. And I wanted to keep that to give the appearance of a hood area around the engine that could be removed on the K-7 when it's finished to work on the engine itself. And so what I end up doing is I cut the front half off of this Muscle Machine. And I strip it, you know, I strip it down, I clean it up a little bit, nothing fancy. And then I just cut, there's that plastic insert piece that I'm definitely keeping to go around the engine. At first I was thinking of just using that plastic piece and then maybe creating the cover for that hood area out of styrene, which probably would have been the sensible way to do it, the easier way to do it. But oh hell no, why do it the easy way? Let's have some fun. So, any excuse to use the jeweler saw, you can almost see what I'm thinking there. It's scary. If you can see what I'm thinking, start to worry. Because this is truly a goofy-ass idea. But I went with it. So to kind of explain what I'm doing here, I'm just putting a couple drops of CA glue down there. And then I'm going to take this flat piece of styrene, just put it in there. That is not going to stay there, but I'm using it as a support. And there you see me using the accelerant just to get it to stay. And I'm just using that as a support then for the other hood that I'm going to, oh yeah, JB Weld into place. I just wanted to be sure and clean the accelerant out of there. And yeah, you see how I use that styrene to just make sure that that hood I'm putting in there, that body piece I'm putting in, will be flat with the top of the K-7. So once I have that in place, there you go, kids. It's JB Weld time. And oh yeah, I'm mixing up a nice healthy amount of this stuff. And I always use this type of JB Weld. I know some of you use the stick JB Weld, where you kind of knead the pieces together. And I don't know, this stuff works fantastically for me just because there's no firmness to it out of the gate. It really is. You can put it wherever you want to put it. So there you see where I have the body piece from the other car where I want it on the plastic up there. And what I'm going to do is JB Weld around that to hold it in place. Something I've learned that works well with JB Weld is masking tape. So what I like to do, you can do some interesting things with masking tape and JB Weld. There I've masked off the areas I do not want JB Weld to stick on the metal. And so I'm just basically filling around the edges of the hood that's mounted in there. The first setup of JB Weld has dried now. That engine, that hood compartment from the other vehicle, now it's not going anywhere. It's JB welded in. Now what I'm doing is covering up where I want that plastic insert to go on the engine, that hole in the prior hood, and around the edges of the K-7. I don't want them getting dirty. And then I basically made, if you look straight down above the roof line, you see that I also put masking tape in there. That's actually to build the firewall. That's building a wall between the engine compartment and the cab out of JB Weld. And I'm using the tape as the structure for that wall. Once the JB Weld sets up, I just pull that tape off. And I have a nice smooth wall. It's kind of hard to explain until you do it. And I'm actually doing it on a build that's coming up after this one, where I fill in a body panel on that vehicle, and I just put JB Weld in there. I'm just using plastic to smooth that out. I basically put masking tape over this hole in the body, put JB Weld behind it, let it set up, and then I peel that tape off, and I have a perfectly smooth in effect, metal panel, metal epoxy panel. So there you see all the tape I've put on here. Now after it's set up, it's just a matter of cleaning it up, filing it smooth, getting it looking pretty. Now you see that notch in there, that hole from the other hood. That's where the plastic insert drops into. So there you have that, and then there's where the engine mounts. It's fitting perfectly. It honestly couldn't have worked out better. It seemed batshit crazy, but it worked. So now I've pretty much JB welded everything in sight. So it's time to put more JB weld to reinforce it. So I was just doing a little more construction of the firewall because I'm building that cab, the interior of the cab, so it'll just drop in. And I'm strengthening everything else JB weld-wise under there. And that's all this is. And I'm filling in a few little areas up on the top, and that's about it. This is just a little finishing stuff and a little strengthening stuff. As I was filing it down, there were some areas that I still needed to fill. I will go over this once it's all finished. Once I'm finished with the JB weld and have it about as good as I'm going to get it, then I'll go over this with Bondo spot putty, just to fill in any irregularities, try and get it as smooth as possible. But this thing is strong as hell at this point. Now I mentioned that I was using the muscle machine wheels, and there you see them over at the left-hand side of the screen. I've shot the base with black paint at this point. And so what I ended up doing, the muscle machine's axles, basically those wheels are fixed on those axles. So I ended up using brass tubing. I cut the muscle machine wheels, the axles, in half. I used the brass tubing as a replacement axle in effect. So I take those little stubs of the muscle machine's axles and CA glue them into the brass tubing. And then I'm using styrene tubing, which you see there, I'm putting tubes there, as the axle tubes. I'm just tacking them in with CA glue at this point to make sure everything's working right. You see the little stubs of the tires there above, yeah, the ones I just took out of the picture. Anyhow, so what I end up with is the brass tube. The wheels are fixed on the brass tube in effect, and the brass tube will be spinning inside the styrene tube. So the styrene tube is the axle tube itself. So at this point, I've already put the brass tubes. I think they were brass tubes. It might have been aluminum tubes. Anyhow. But those will spin inside the styrene tube, and you'll see that here in a second. Again, I'm just lining those up. And I used CA glue at first to tack these in place just to make sure everything's straight. And then later I'll reinforce that with, you guessed it, JB Weld. If you look at the top of the screen also, you'll see that I had, there's the Bondo spot putty that I had put on the engine area of the casting itself. And that was just to smooth everything out. I hadn't sanded it at that point. But that gives you an idea what I was doing. The muscle machine wheels really fit this casting well. This is another part where it gets kind of interesting. I wanted that interior to just drop in. I didn't want it to be glued in. I didn't want it to be glued to the base. I wanted it to be, for lack of a better term, a lot like the original, where it's a separate little piece. It fits. It just drops in. And that's what I was after with this. And it actually turned out pretty well. I did use styrene to make some of the pieces I needed. And so there's a lot of cutting and fitting and a lot of test fitting. When you're doing something like this, you just are constantly test fitting things. You're cutting the pieces, you're cutting them oversized, and not horribly oversized, but oversized so that then you can sand them down to fit. At least that's the way I do it. And I was able to, but it was lucky because of how it all ended up fitting. Pushing the seat back and everything worked well with in effect, the gull wing doors. So there I just used the Plastistruct cement to hold it to that backing. And then I just start cutting things and fitting. And test fitting. any excuse to throw a little JB Weld on a project. Like this one didn't have enough already. I love this stuff because, you know, like now putting this JB Weld. Now those styrene axle tubes, you know, they're CA glued in place. I didn't go crazy with the CA glue, but they're CA glued in place and they probably would stay there. But I throw this JB Weld over it and those things are never going anywhere. I mean, you pretty much could break off the styrene on both sides of the JB Weld and this thing would still roll. Now, after I hit it with first primer, there is nothing that tells you have a lot of work still to do than hitting it with primer the first time. That's the part that makes you go, okay, I'm not as close to finished as I thought I was. The primer really reveals all of the flaws, all of the little things that still need to be sanded out. And, you know, you do these things the best you can, and you could do them for an eternity if you wanted to. I truly, perfection, I don't know that perfection exists. We get as close to it as we can. There you see it after another hit of primer. You see how that engine portion, the plastic insert, fits in there. Another test fit of the engine. At this point, I'm pretty happy with it. That silver is, as opposed to the primer that I hit it with earlier, that's the metal cast base coat, which is a very revealing coating. After doing that, you see that you still have a lot more to do again, and you end up sanding again. But then eventually you get to the metal cast paint. And I went with red. Like you've never seen this before. That's before the clear coat. I did have to custom make the back end on here, the insert for the bed that holds the vehicle together, in order to give clearance for those wheels, the wheels and tires. I ended up cutting that piece. Typically, that's just a cast piece that you see. I ended up cutting a chunk out of the middle to give the wheel clearance, and then I just used a piece of K&S metal that, you know, I happen to have a sheet of this. I think it's aluminum. I don't know. Happen to have a thin sheet of it, cut it down to size, and then, you know, JB welded the pieces together. Yes, more JB Weld. Yeah, yes, this thing, it's not as heavy as the Ghostbusters build. It's heavy, but it's not that heavy. But yeah, I did get a little metal cast paint. I painted details. Check out the taillights. That's the silver Sharpie, and then went over it with the Tamiya clear red. There's that insert after it's set up. Just needed to clean it up a little bit. And, you know, eventually this thing all ends up coming together. Unfortunately, I had problems with the clear coat, which surprised me because the clear coat I've been using has been working well, so I'm not quite sure why it gave me a problem this time, but it did. But with a little extra work and a little finesse, I was able to get it to be acceptable. And there's the tailgate. I just cleaned it up a little bit, hit it with a little bit of black that I still had in a can. Used up the rest of the can on this. It was actually the black that I used on the K-7 Dragster, which was like a metallic charcoal. Check out the interior. I couldn't resist doing the seats in red. And couldn't resist that. I just love red seats. The red inserts on seats. I ended up cutting that off the original K-7, that grill area, and I just glued it into place. I did not. Typically, it fits in from the inside, but I had heavily modified all of that. I know I called this a bone shaker K-7, but I couldn't hang a skull off the front of it. I actually have the skull I was going to put on the front of it. I had 3D printed, geez, like 4 different sizes, 5 different sizes to get it just right. And I couldn't do it. It just did not look right up there. So this is like a bone shaker hauler. And we're just, now check this out. Watch how it just drops in. I was so happy with it. I'm so proud of that. Out of the entire build, that could be the part I'm happiest about. Sure, I love how the engine looks sticking out of the hood just like the Bone Shaker. I love how I incorporated that front end from another vehicle. It disappears into this. I'm thrilled with that. But that interior, just having it drop in like that. I mean, I know there's guys that make stuff out of styrene all the time, and they could, that's no big deal to them. But for me, that's a big deal. I'm pretty happy with that. So now we're just getting this thing together. I know this has been a long video, and I'd like to thank you all for bearing with me through all of this. I thought there was a lot to see in this. A lot of different things going on in this build that you might find interesting. If you fast forwarded through them, God bless you. I understand. But there's some interesting things going on in this one, and I didn't want to cut chunks out. I wanted to show as much of it as I could. It is, it's like a 30, 35-minute video. So that's really long. But it's a big build. It's not just a wheel swap. It has a wheel swap, but it's not just a wheel swap. So we get it together here. And all in all, in the end, I have to say I'm pretty happy with it. You can see that black tailgate. You'll get a better look here in a second, but you can tell it's not just black. It does have this metallic to it that's kind of cool. So there you have it. That's where we ended up. So to do a little flashback here. Yeah, I know I painted the steering wheel and call him Silver. So to take us back, that's what a K-7 looks like as you normally see them. A normal K-7. And now for the abnormal K-7. The Bone Shaker K-7. The BS K-7. There you see the interior. I'm really happy. See how that looks? Gold wing doors open. It looks like it was made that way. So, there's some glamour shots coming up. I hope you all like this build. It's my third K-7 now. There was the Dragster. There was the Ghostbusters K-7. And now the Bone Shaker K-7. So they're all a little bit twisted. And I'm proud of it. Here's the glamour shots. To my subscribers, thank you very much for subscribing. To those of you who haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. You got nothing to lose. You might see more really goofy builds like this one. Thank you for sitting through this. Give me your comments down below. Let me know what you think. If this is just flat out batshit crazy, or if you like it, or what you might have done a little differently. Yeah, you would have hung the skull off the front, I know. Anyhow, thank you very much. All of you, stay safe and healthy out there. And we'll catch you in the next one.